Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm here with Sunniva O'Flynn, for the IFI curator, and David O'Mahony, the head of programming. So we are here ahead of the IFI Documentary Festival that's going to be starting very, very soon. And we're just going to be having a little chat about the fabulous lineup. So we have some very interesting ones. And I believe Kevin Roche's documentary, The Quiet Architect, is that going to get a release afterwards as well?
It is, yeah. We're opening it on the 13th of October.
That's correct.
Yep. So we're very pleased to have Kevin Roche, The Quiet Architect, closing the festival. It's a world premiere. It's a really fine documentary filmed by Kate McCullough about this Kevin Roche, Pritzker-winning architect who I must admit I hadn't heard of before. And I'm surprised by that. Not that I know a huge amount about architecture, but because he's such a towering figure in American architecture and world architecture, and it's just kind of surprising that we haven't shown off about him before, that, you know, he hasn't been somebody that Irish people have championed in the pub as like, here's another great, we have all of these Irish heroes. So anyway, it's a fine documentary about this architect whose work is primarily in the United States. He has been working there since the 1950s and has a huge reputation among architects, and indeed, you know, he would be greatly admired by the inhabitants of the buildings that he has designed in New York, California, and elsewhere.
And famous, I guess, for Irish people for the Convention Centre.
Yes.
Which is the one significant public building that people will be familiar with that he made on these shores.
Very, very striking. Now we'll just go down to A Cambodian Spring. So this is one of the ones you were mentioning that is an Irish produced.
It's directed by Chris Kelly, who's a Northern Irish filmmaker. A really fine piece of work made over a long period, over about 6 years, looking at three people living in Cambodia who are concerned with environmental issues, are concerned with the takeover of residential lands by big business. It's about activism. It's about three people, kind of surprising people, two women who would have been homemakers as far as I remember, well, kind of modestly private figures rather than public figures. They take on this cause, as does a Buddhist monk, and it's his journey is very interesting because, you know, it is against his practice and the beliefs of his religious community that he would go out and kind of publicly protest. So the film it's a long film, as I say, made over 6 years. It's one of those, like many others in the programme, where you find yourself in the IFI on a Saturday afternoon or whenever it's scheduled, and you spend 2 or 3 hours really learning about a community and a society that you might not have known before, and you come away having learned much more, being, you know, illuminated about a society and a culture that, you know, that you might not have had any exposure to before. So, I mean, I think that's one of the great joys of a documentary festival, and certainly in my kind of viewing of these titles, you know, over a period, I came away from that period, emerged from that period, I just think a smarter, more informed person about all sorts of stuff. Yeah. And I think that would be other people's experience too.
Certainly. It's a great education programming, the Documentary Film Festival. That's absolutely true. To get to this bunch of 16 or so titles, you may have applied through 40, 50 films, you know, so you kind of...
The creme de la creme.
This is what rose to the top, exactly right, yeah.
So you know an awful lot about a lot of
stuff,
odd stuff. You do particularly, you know, because you watch far more than I.
Things, that you didn't know you wanted to know about.
It does definitely seem as well, we were talking about themes, but at the moment in the current climate, like social justice and immigration, like they're two things that are really, I think, at the forefronts of everybody's mind. And
immigration is key. Yeah. I mean, it really is. I mean, there was so much that I watched that in some way tackled the theme of immigration, even albeit obliquely, but it was still definitely there. I would certainly highlight the film The Good Postman, because it's a wonderful microcosm of a very macro issue. It's a tiny village. When I say tiny, I think the inhabitants of this village are maybe 40 people. It's Bulgarian, it's on the Turkish border. It's a very, very elderly population. And the town has become split over the issue of whether or not to invite refugees into the village. And there's an election for the new mayor of the town. And Ivan, the postman, decides to take it upon himself to go for mayor. He feels that the only way to regenerate the town, to actually inject some new blood, because this town is dying. I would say the mean age is close to 70. He feels this is the only way that there will be children and laughter again. But it's a very conservative village, and his opponent, also called Ivan, runs against him, and the town becomes completely split on this notion. But you really get a sense of, within this tiny little fight, we have a war that's kind of simmering across Europe, that they're having these conversations on a very macro level,
as well.
across the world.
Yeah.
So it's really well achieved to focus on something so minute, to get a sense of the whole. Very, very powerful stuff, and it's observational. I like documentaries that don't try to lead you too much, so there's no two-camera interviews or talking heads or authorial voice. It's just observational of the outcome of the election, really, the two guys campaigning. It's fascinating.
I suppose as well. When's this screening actually?
It's Friday the 28th at 8:30.
Brilliant. And I was going to say as well, the documentary, like as a piece of art as well, holds such sway and it's so important at the moment as well, because it's just this window into other people's lives. It's informative and it helps promote empathy as well.
Yeah. It's interesting as a piece of art, because I certainly saw with last year, there was, and this year too, but some of them didn't make the grade, that there's documentary is definitely changing, or certain documentary filmmakers are pushing at the parameters of what we would consider a documentary. I mean, I would kind of cast my mind back last year to Camera Person, which we give a short run to then in January, which was a very unconventional experimental piece, which would straddle the kind of artist moving image cinema world as well as documentary. And I find that quite interesting. And again, last year we had an animated documentary, Tower, which was about a shooting, America's first major public shooting, which they're very familiar with now, unfortunately. And it was filmed, but then rotoscoped over, that animation technique. So it was interesting that, technically it was a documentary, but it was sort of arguing for new forms. I would pick out Macala this year as being something a little bit more unconventional, as it is a very tight focus on one man's journey, almost experiential, almost in real time it feels. Of course it's not, it's only 90 minutes. It's a Congolese charcoal maker. I know, it doesn't sound like the most thrilling thing. I saw this at Cannes, and it is quite challenging. It is essentially watching this man on his enormous pile of charcoal on his tiny wee bike, walking to sell his wares to town. That's kind of it. Dreadful things happen on the way, all caught in the kind of the harsh gaze of the camera. But it's capitalism in the raw. It's tough stuff. Not for everyone, but it did. I thought it was astonishing. I was very gratified when it won. It was in the Critics' Week strand, and it won the best film of Critics' Week. So I was pleased that I wasn't losing it. But it certainly it's for me one of the most interesting films in the program. But I would certainly recognise that it's not for everyone. And back to what I was saying, it's trying to find as many unique and distinct films in a program. And
that's it. It's very interesting, the different ways people tell the story, or how involved a filmmaker is in with the narrative, and when they step back, even how their views are being put across. That's
absolutely, and Macala really goes to the heart of that. There's one particular incident that you could see the filmmakers could maybe have intervened to stop something from happening, but they don't. They capture it, they document it, and you can only, as a viewer, you're wondering why they don't put the camera down and help this man. But that's that question of you can't intervene if you're observing, or it's a knotty ethical issue, but they can only have had those queasy conversations in the edit that perhaps should we show this? Not that it's just, you'll know it when you see it.
No spoilers.
You know it when you see it, but that's the audience's first reaction, is why can't they step in, and why are they just filming this? But it makes for a lot of kind of knotty debate after the screening.
I think that's one of the joys of the festival, when you're juxtaposing different kinds of documentary forms, and as a viewer, if you watch a number of films together, you begin to understand different ways of storytelling, and different styles become amplified because you're seeing them together. And I think with regard to the Irish material, possibly one of the distinctions within the group would be films that we're presenting that are about kind of historical subject matters, like It Tolls for Thee or Alien, the Cuban boy story, and the kind of contemporary issues where the documentary is in itself kind of investigating a story that's ongoing. And there's different challenges to documentary makers. I guess with telling historical stories, the challenge is to make it dramatic, to make it interesting, because, you know, for many viewers, they might know the outcomes because it's something in the past. But like I say, I think that's one of the great joys of the festival, that you're seeing different kinds of work, different kinds of stories. I think with a lot of the work this year, a lot of the Irish work, the stories are just darn good yarns.
Yeah.
You know, they're like Alien, the Cuban boy story, film made by Ross MacDonald and produced by Trevor Burney, is the story of the little Cuban boy, Alien Gonzalez, who in 1999 washes up on the shores of Miami, having travelled with his mother and others on a little inflatable boat from Cuba, and they arrive on the shores of America, and the tug of love then that ensues as his family back in Cuba try and get the child back, and his relatives in Miami are determined to hold on to him. Tragically, he's lost his mother on the way, so he's just an isolated little boy. So there's this kind of extraordinary story illustrated by great news footage and by interviews with his family. And the filmmakers combine that story that we know to some extent with new news, and they allow us to understand that the story of this little boy is a microcosm of relations between America and Cuba, without having to be polemical. There's the story, there's the tension embodied in this little family history. So that's one that is just a powerful story that would be of great interest, you know, as gripping as any kind of drama feature. Rocky Rusmuck is another really fine documentary made by Michael Fanning in Galway. It's a piece about Sean Mannion, an Irish boxer from Rusmuck, of course, who travels to the United States and becomes almost world champion for a period in the 1970s. It is a documentary about triumph and about failure, or certainly about what becomes of a person after world triumph. It's about sentiments that we've become familiar with in Irish documentary. It's about emigration, it's about exile, it's about yearning, but it's also about coming home and confronting those perhaps romanticized notions of home that a person might hold. So it's very interesting. It too is very entertaining, though, because Sean Mannion, the subject, is a very modest character, and you're rooting for him the whole time. Yeah, from his kind of Gaeilgeoir beginnings in the west of Ireland to fancy Boston, and his experience there coincides with black civil rights movements in North America. So there's some paralleling there with his own kind of experience of his cultural heritage.
And I was going to say, are we joined by any filmmakers? Who's going to be?
We certainly are. On the Irish side of things, we are coming down with filmmakers and producers. So I will let Sunniva detail some of the highlights of those. But we have one on the international side, which is a film we haven't mentioned yet, Motherland, which is an observational documentary, again, about the busiest maternity ward on earth, which is in Manila. So we spend some time with this extraordinary place, which is just a sea of beds and trolleys and babies everywhere, and it's totally chaotic, it seems, but we come to learn there are systems in place. It's almost like its own town and its own kind of self-supporting village. It's an incredible document. We have the director of that film, Ramona S. Diaz, coming in, so she'll be with us for a Q&A on that after that screening, and she's around for a few days, so if you might see her around the IFI, bumping into other filmmakers as well, of which there are many, and Sunniva is going to tell you about some of those.
Yeah, so we have Jeremiah Cullinan and Olga Chernavacha coming in to speak about their film Butterfly City, which is a really fascinating documentary about Olga's town, a town where she lived, Visaginas in Lithuania, a town that was created in 1975 to service a nuclear power plant that was established there. And with the disintegration of the USSR, the plant closes, but all of the inhabitants, many of whom are of Russian extraction, are left behind. So the documentary considers their position, living in this odd kind of bubble. Who are they? What is their cultural heritage? What is their citizenship? They are Lithuanians, but they are many of their hearts lie in Russia. So that's a fine piece of work that Jeremiah and Olga will speak very expertly about to us.
Brilliant. That sounds really interesting. And there's some good feminist pieces as well. So you also have the It Tolls for Thee, about like a great strong historical figure, and
we're delighted to have so many F-rated films. As you know, we've adopted the F rating in the IFI now, and I think more than half of our films in this year's lineup have been awarded the Noble F rating. So we're very pleased about that.
Yeah, and you're right, the Mary Elms It Tolls for Thee is a story about which people, I don't think, are familiar. She was a quiet figure, somebody who didn't seek out the limelight, a Cork woman, Mary Elms, who, through her work as a medical person, enabled the escape of a number of children from camps during the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War. So she's an unsung heroine until this documentary essentially has been produced by Andrew Gallimore, and it will be very interesting for people to see that, voiced by Winona Ryder, no less, who does a really fine job. She really does.
Is she coming in?
I haven't confirmed it yet. We hope.
Well, watch this space.
Yeah. The other F-rated film that's catching my eye here is Loving Lorna. And Loving Lorna is somewhat unusual in that it is a wholly Irish subject matter about a young woman, Lorna Nichol, who lives in Ballymun. She is the subject of a documentary made by two Swedish sisters who come to Ireland and are intrigued by this young woman, by her ambition. She wants to be a farrier, which is somebody who makes horseshoes, isn't it? So she has spent her life around horses. Her father is a horse lover as well. And it's a very intimate portrait of this young woman with this interesting ambition and somebody who has the support of her family entirely.
Sounds really good. And your top picks, if you guys could just...
I mean, we've talked quite extensively about some of the films that we have on, and quite challenging themes, and quite difficult subject matters in some cases, and formally some of them are quite challenging, like Bacala, etc. But there's two that are almost purely entertaining, and this kind of goes to the heart of what I was saying earlier on, that you're trying to add light and shade into the program, that you need to have those kind of peaks and troughs thematically. So I'd like to mention the film called Nothing Would, which I saw back in Cannes, and it was an incredibly entertaining experience. Certainly in the pressure cooker environment of film festival like Cannes, where things can be incredibly intense, this was a little ray of sunshine. It's made by Sonia Kronlund, who's a French filmmaker, so again, F-rated title, glad to say. And it follows the gonzo efforts of Salim Shaheen, who is Afghanistan's premier no-budget filmmaker. Hence the title. As he says himself, there's Hollywood, Bollywood, and Nothing Would, which is Afghanistan. There is no money, there's nothing. So we follow him deep into Taliban-occupied territory as he's making his 109th and 10th film simultaneously, with absolutely no money. The same merry band of misfits doing the camera work, playing all of the parts. His leading man plays most of the female parts as well, just throws a wig on. It's very, very funny, very irreverent. And all through this, we have the terrified voice and figure of Sonia Kronlund, the director, wondering, are they going to be killed? Are they going to be... Because they're going deep, like the places that they're filming are quite extraordinary, and there's ridiculous action. They're all sci-fi action, with really, really bad... special effects done on a laptop afterwards. So he's been described accurately as the Ed Wood of Afghan filmmaking. So it's that kind of, one take wonder, on to the next film. And he's a celebrity. They sell really well. They sell truckloads of DVDs. And so it's a snapshot on that. So we're opening with that. It's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. All of the kind of political stuff is there. It's quite in the background. It's a very entertaining documentary, and I certainly appreciated it on that level. And another one, which is just kind of comfort food almost, I loved, was Rumble, The Indians Who Rock the World. We're all getting very familiar with rock docs now. Everyone loves a rock doc. This sheds light onto the role of Native Americans have played in popular music from the turn of the century onwards, from jazz, rock and roll. Like Jimi Hendrix comes from Native American stock, Robbie Robertson of the band, etc., etc. So it's little snapshots. It's about 6 or 7 kind of standalone vignettes that look at a particular figure and focus on them. So it's almost like a collection of shorts. Brilliant talking heads. It being a music documentary, Martin Scorsese is, of course, one of the talking heads. It's just a really accomplished piece of work, and it will feed that kind of rock doc love that we certainly acknowledge in the IFI. Anytime we put on any music-related films, they tend to do very, very well. So I'd imagine that one will do well on a Saturday night, which is, I think, when I've programmed it. Yes, I have.
Yeah, that's it. Everyone gets in the mood to go out dancing then.
Exactly, yeah.
The event that I'm most looking forward to, I think, during the documentary festival is the screening of Jaha's Promise. So we're screening this film about a young woman, Jaha Dukura. She's a young Gambian woman who moved from Gambia to the United States as a teenager. So she was escaping an unhappy marriage. Now that sounds fairly routine, but actually the unhappiness of her marriage and her experience to that point was very dark. She's somebody who experienced female genital mutilation, and she's somebody who ultimately begins a campaign against FGM in the United States and in her own country. So she returns to Gambia and confronts the people who would have been responsible for her own mutilation. She is coming into the IFI to speak with the directors Patrick Farrell and Kate O'Callaghan. I feel so privileged at the prospect of meeting this young woman who has done so much, who just is incredibly brave. And her story is told with great sensitivity and with great determination to visit, lots of different countries, to engage people and so on. It's a really fine piece of work, and I think that event is going to be well worth seeing.
Okay, and just before we go, I just want to ask about the shorts.
The Shorts programme has again this year been programmed by my colleague Dean Kavanagh. So Dean works with us in the Irish Film Programming Department. He's a technical wizard. He's a filmmaker himself of documentaries and non-documentaries. So Dean processed all of the many shorts that were submitted and has put together a programme that is very varied and is perhaps more multicoloured than last year's programme, which was distinguished by the numbers of portraits there were. There was a lot of short portrait docs this last year, but this year's programme we have Throwline, which is a piece about taxi drivers and their work in supporting people, in identifying people who might be in states of crisis, and the interventions they make. He has programmed Tit for Tat, which is one of the most cleverly titled documentaries I've ever seen. So it's a piece about women who've experienced mastectomy and breast cancer and their efforts to come to terms with that through tattooing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's a very kind of uplifting piece of work. The No Plan, again, we're with Scandinavians making films about young Irish people and horses. So we have
themes arising.
Yeah. Scandinavians and Irish horse people. So this is a Norwegian woman who's made a musical documentary about her encounters with kids on the streets of Dublin riding horses.
So the IFI Documentary Festival starts September the 27th and finishes October the 1st. So definitely make sure you get your tickets. They're available to buy online now. So www.ifi.ie and /DocFest. So you have a lot to cram in. You have a lot of choice. You can go have a sad film, happy film, uplifting film, and then go to the pub.
Exactly.
And thanks so much for chatting to us.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you, Gemma.